Good afternoon, everybody. It's been a while since I've joined you here. Hope you're all well. Just going to do a quick sound check to make sure you can all hear me. So if you can hear me, please pop a yes in your chat box. Just lets me know that I'm live. You can hear me. Can everybody hear me? Might just take a couple of seconds for it to catch up. Perfect. Yep, plenty of yeses there. Thank you very much. Just a quick introduction from myself. My name is Chantel Newton and I am the marketing manager at the UK Contact Centre Forum. I'm also editor of our online e-magazine Contact Centre Monthly. Just to go through a few housekeeping points before we begin. If you do have any questions today, please pop them in either the chat box or the question box for our panel to pick up on and have a discussion on afterwards. You can do that throughout the session and your questions will be picked up and put to the panel at the end. Any that we don't get to, we will make sure we have an answer for you either by email or direct message. We've got some polls for you to take part in today, so when prompted, the poll will appear automatically on screen. They are multiple choice, but you can only select one, so just select your answer. The poll will then be closed down by myself and I will publish the results on the screen for you to have a look at and for our panel to discuss. The webinar is expected to last about an hour today. If you're unable to stay for the whole session, we are recording it today and the recording will be sent automatically to you within about 4 hours of the session ending. It will also be situated on our website for you to share with your peers as well. So to get today's session started, I'm going to hand you over to Gareth Millward. He's the Vulnerable Customer Manager from Ikano Bank. Thanks, Gareth.
No, thank you. Thanks, Chantel. And thanks everybody again for joining us today. And for those that are watching sort of like post-record, I guess I just wanted to, like Chantel said, it's been maybe a little while since we've done one of these sessions, but I just wanted to sort of start with a bit of an introduction into the aim, first of all, of these sessions. We see them very much as a share of best practice, a chance to be able to speak to experts and collaborate and ask questions. So as Chantel says, we're hoping to have some time at the end of the session where we can answer a few questions, go through a few topics. So don't be afraid at any point. As soon as it sort of pops into your head, pop it into the chat and we'll go through them at the end and hopefully sort of answer questions as best we can, I suppose, really. So the topic for today's session is customers impacted by the cost of living crisis. A topic that we're going to look to cover in hopefully some great detail with the hour that we've got, hopefully from a couple of different angles to give many of you different sort of lenses into what it is that's impacting our customers. Some of the general things we're looking to try and cover today are how we can identify customers that need our help, first of all, but more than that, what sort of conversations should we be looking out for with customers? What are the triggers, the points of which we feel that we need to step in and offer that support? And also, what can we do to, when we find someone that needs support, offer them the right support in the right way, in the way that meets them? So we're looking at a few things today about what sort of support is available, again, from a couple of different lenses. And then if we've got time, maybe some of the unseen impacts of the cost of living crisis. So I guess why this topic? Why is it important? You know, why is it something that we're talking about today? Well, I think it's timely. I was looking at a few stats in anticipation for the call today, and timely is the word, I suppose. Last month we saw the Bank of England raise the interest rates by another 0.5%. 4% now, the highest since 2008. I feel like we've been saying the highest level since 2008 for a little while now, as these interest rate hikes keep on coming, and if we're led to believe, likely to keep on rising as well. But with that goes hand in hand the UK inflation rate, right? Technically declined a little bit in January, which you think was good news. It went from 10.5% in December to 10.1 in January. But that said, it's been as high as 11.1 back in October, a 41-year high was the start of the headline stat on that one. And the easing is mainly driven, I guess, by transport and hospitality downward contributions, but it's not all good news for the customers, in fact, that it's gone down, because inflation might be slowing as a whole, but when we look at food and drink inflation, they still remain as high as 16.7%. So the impact to customers is still there and is still being felt. And still, I guess the need for support is still there for many of our customers. PayPlan, who one of our panelists works for today, we're going into a little bit more depth, but they recently did a survey, and there's some interesting stats that I've stolen with pride. when I was coming into my introduction about what they've been looking into, what they found out. Just a couple to share with you. First of all, that 1 in 2 people are going without heating or skipping meals at the moment. And 51% of the people they surveyed are using credit to pay for essential day-to-day living. And 80% of them are saying that it is having an impact and their mental health is suffering as a direct result of it. But I think, not unselfishly, the one that stood out for me the most working for a bank and a creditor is that of the people that have spoken to creditors about needing help, 54% of the people surveyed said that the interaction hadn't necessarily helped their situation. That's the worrying one. I think that's the one that sort of stood out to me, and hopefully some of the things in this session will help us all sort of get a bit of clarity and get some advice and guidance on what we can do to improve stats like that. So there's certainly room to improve, is I guess what I'm saying from the end stat there. And on that note, that takes me, I guess, to our first poll of the day that we wanted to ask. How confident are we all? How confident are you that the processes you currently have in place are providing good customer outcomes for customers impacted by financial difficulty? We've done it as a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being I'm not confident at all, I've got a lot to do, 5, and there may be a few of you that say, do you know what, I'm in a fantastic place, nothing I need to do any better. I am at the peak of my powers, if you like, in terms of what I'm doing to support the customers in these situations. So yeah, general poll for everybody there today, between 1 to 5. How confident are we that what we're doing right now in our processes are having a positive impact on good customer outcomes? Now, I'll give you a sec to go through the panel there, the poll there. While you're doing that, I just wanted to take a few seconds just to introduce some of the people on the panel that we've got today. We've got, as well as myself, Vulnerable Customer Manager at Ikano. We've got Rick Mills working for Shelter. Over a decade's experience with shelters and operations manager, helping the charity to support people in need, obviously with that lens of home and rent related issues, etc. So a few questions hopefully we can put to Rick as an expert in his sector. We've got Ed at PayPlan, who works very closely with creditors, so definitely got, I guess, hopefully Ed, some personal objectives to increase that percentage we just talked about earlier about creditors not necessarily doing all they can to help the customers. Working for PayPlan, of course, one of the country's leading debt advice organisations. And we've got Rob Irons. Rob works for HGS, a leader in digital customer experience and a customer experience expert is the way I'm going to position you, Rob, hopefully. That sits well with you. Who can give us a bit of an insight into, I guess, through the customer lens, into a certain aspect, into what we can be doing better to support our customers. Welcome, guys. Thanks again as well to the panel for joining today. Hopefully this poll will give us something to get us teeth into to start with. So what we got here, 47%, the vast majority of the responses then in the middle. Could do better, I suppose. Somewhat confident. Maybe that stat dented your pride a little bit, I don't know. Somewhat confident. And then the really good thing I would say, taking a look at that, is that none of you are at 1. We all think we're doing something, I suppose. That's what I take from that result. We all think we're doing something. 37% at 4, quietly confident, and 2%, well done. Well done. You're doing everything you think you can possibly do at the moment. 2% is a fantastic place to be in. Hopefully we'll go through some things that take good to great as well as we go through the session. Awesome. Really interesting stat. Thank you. Thank you for that. Really interesting stuff. So the format of the session today is going to be a little bit of a question and answer, as we said earlier. So I'm going to pose a few questions to get the conversation going for our panel, and we'll take the conversation from there, really. The first question I wanted to raise was, what should we look out for, first of all, in our conversations with our customers to make it easy for them to tell us that they need that support? You know, what is it that we should be doing in order to help identify? And Rob, being that you've got that customer lens, I'm gonna throw it open to you first of all, if I can, buddy.
Yeah, no, brilliant. Thanks, Gareth. And hi, everybody. Yeah, and it's a really interesting one because I think, in the not so distant past, vulnerable customers it's a term really it was reserved for, the elderly or the disabled and things like that. And certainly when we were looking things, it was what do you do to help and support those people? But yeah, cost of living crisis, as you just said, it's changed it massively. And I think it's what 1 in 3 households now are sort of classed as vulnerable almost to some extent with struggling to pay bills. So the need to change the way in which we sort of deliver services is massive. And I think you're right in terms of what should we look for in the conversation. I think we've got to be cognizant of the fact that whilst we're all there to offer support to people and help them out, in order to do that, we've got to create, first of all, the right environment for it. We've got to train people so that they can listen to people and understand what people's challenges are, and to some extent as well, think about what the channels are that we're allowing people to access, because there are some differences there in the way in which people will interact. I mean, if we sort of go through each of those sort of bits, it's critical that when a customer actually reaches out, that obviously they receive empathy from caller, they feel listened to, and we can tailor a solution to meet their need. Training of agents, therefore, is absolutely critical. That's the first thing. I think they've got to be able to support and identify those people now who are now vulnerable. And the reality is that might be the way in which we help those agents to listen to people more than necessarily they talk, because you assume that customers actually will give you some of this information. They might not give it straight off the bat, but they might say things like job losses or illness or other things that just identify and put them into that sort of that area. And in addition to sort of training and coaching agents in that way, we've also got to empower them a little bit more. We are, as an outsourcer, we have lots of metrics from our clients around AHTs and handle times and all those kind of bits and pieces. And the reality actually is that if you identify a vulnerable customer, you kind of need to say to an agent, right, that sort of needs to go to one side slightly. You need to relax that slightly or have a different approach to that, because only then can somebody actually take the time to listen, to have that time to sort of build the empathy with the person, help the person to have the conversation and really get under the skin of what's actually required. We deal with lots of people across lots of different projects that we run, and it's interesting that one of the things we've talked to agents about is that sometimes they will get a call through from somebody, and that person who's calling us, we may be the only person they speak to in that day. It might be that's the case. And so at that point in time, we've also got to have a think about a little bit of duty of care around it as well. It's almost about how do we then work with that person and identify them, and about how we can help them in the best possible way. Just very quickly, I think we talk about making it easy for people to tell us. Technology is something. The reality is that we've certainly got services where people are potentially embarrassed to talk to us about things. We run a service for money and pension service, part of the government service. We have a demographic there that reaches right from 21 up to 80, depending on whether you've got a credit card issue or you're struggling with your pensions. What we found actually is that, again, people who were at that sort of lower age demographic, really didn't want to have a conversation with somebody. They felt too embarrassed to almost talk to somebody about it. So we've introduced things like WhatsApp and things into that service. And what that's done is it's changed the way in which we can have those conversations with people, because it means that now people can feel more comfortable speaking to us. We've given them a choice of channels. And as part of that, we are finding that lots more people are able to engage and support. So I think there's two things. I think there's training of agents, and then there's understanding or making it easier for them to approach us by potentially looking at channels and thinking outside the box.
Yeah, it's fantastic you mentioned there, just taking a few bits from that, Rob. You mentioned there that environment to disclosure. I think we talk about in the vulnerability world, it's almost like a buzz phrase that we've been saying for the last few years now. You've got to create that great environment for someone to disclose. I guess when you look at some of the barriers that might stop someone disclosing, it's almost like a taboo subject still in the UK, isn't it? It's a very British thing not to talk about money, whether you've got it or not. It's not something that we're necessarily all open to talking about. So that perception, that stigma that you mentioned there of being a little bit embarrassed, can dissipate when you talk about different channels, different methods, and the online piece is really, really interesting, isn't it?
And sorry, Gareth, just quickly on that and go to the first bit. It's not always just embarrassment. Sometimes it's people just don't realise they're vulnerable. They don't realise they've fallen into that gap. And true story. And I used to work for the civil service years ago when pension credit was first being launched, and we were interviewing people as part of a understanding the customer journey, potential customer journey. And there was a 92-year-old blind lady, okay, who lived in a care home, and she didn't think she was eligible for pension credit because there were people worse off than her. That was her opinion of the world. And so, you know, it was almost like she hadn't received benefits in what she had because she didn't believe they were for her. So there's also a perception thing that you've got to help people understand. Actually, the help is there for them, not because they should be seen as a handout case, but because actually that's the mechanisms that have been put in place to support everybody.
Yeah, and that's key, like I say, making sure that they know help is there. I think when we look at the stat I opened up with about, I guess, people's experiences that when they'd reached out for support, they didn't necessarily get the outcome they were hoping for, it creates these barriers, doesn't it? So I guess what more can we do to make sure that they gain some comfort before they pick up that one phone call today? Because like I said, Rob, I think for some people that probably is that their only method of contact, and well, their only contact with someone that day. So it makes it a big event, doesn't it, almost? Yep. So we need to make the most of that opportunity. So how do we do more to make sure, I guess, that they get comfort before they pick up the phone, that they mention it, should they identify that they need the help, I suppose?
Yeah, so I think that's about sort of getting on the front foot, isn't it, and trying to help understand and sort of almost set things up through the channels that you're asking people to engage through. So whether it's a website, whether you're writing out to people, whatever it might be, it's making it very clear within those communications in advance that support is there, is that we are there to support people, and yeah, we need to sort of try and help people to therefore, I suppose, offer to us to some extent what needs to be done.
Yeah. I guess we all sort of believe, hopefully at least, we all believe that we work for a business with good culture and with a good ethos and that sort of desire and want to help and needs to support people. It's how you get that across, like you say, and how you position it up front to get on the front foot, and how you get it across to people before they pick up the call. And you mentioned training as well as another key thing there, empowering the staff. I love that word. You need to empower people, but they need to have the knowledge to feel empowered and do the right things that we intend, I suppose. Is there anything that you've found, the hints and tips from a training point of view that you tend to land well with agents?
Yeah, I mean, actually, the best one is, and whether Ed and Rick have got anything on this, but certainly on the money and pension service I mentioned earlier, we've had various charities and organisations come in and meet with our agents and almost do some of the training for them. So actually what they're getting is they're not getting training just from us sort of coming up with a list of things we think are important. They're getting the real life insight from the people who sort of getting this on the ground, and they're imparting their wisdom on the agents. And I think, you know, a lot of organisations are very keen to support in those types of things. And we've had some great opportunities to work the other way as well, and help support and sponsor some of those organisations. So definitely worth reaching out. I think this is a subject that shouts for collaboration. You know, everybody wants to do the best here, and I think, you know, that unlike a lot of things potentially, this one, I think there is a willingness from people to partner up with each other and support.
Yeah, excellent. That's what we want. That's what Ed and Rick, I guess, if you had much experience in your own worlds of that sharing, collaborating, or being the SMEs, I guess, for your respective fields, sharing with other firms.
Yeah, I mean, I do look quite a lot of training actually in the creditor partner world, not only just in terms of debt advice awareness, financial difficulty, vulnerability, but actually sometimes supporting with the skills that Rob was referencing there, identifying the softer skills that are required to engage customers that are going through these challenging times, drawing that out, helping customers be in a better position to ride out those challenges, as well as get the help that they're going to need, whether that's internal to that organisation or through third-party organisations such as ourselves.
Soft skills is a great attribute that I think we can often forget about, can't we? When we look at the hard cold facts and the training and the processes, and when we get into the operational world, soft skills actually mean a lot. People buy into people, somebody once said to me, and I think it does. You know, it rings true to this day. You know, you have to build trust with someone in order to feel confident in talking about the situation. Soft skills mean a lot. Good communicators, definitely. are really important. Excellent, thank you, great stuff. And I guess that leads us nicely on to the next question I wanted to pose, really, around, okay, so we do all these things, or these proactive things to identify when someone needs support, and we spot the opportunities there when they arise, so that we know we've got someone that we need to get the right sort of help. How do we then connect it? What's the best way, and what support links have we got available in order to connect customers to that support? Ed, I'm going to throw that one to you if I can.
Yeah, thanks, Gareth. Good afternoon, everyone. I think it's important to recognise that help is at hand, that there is a very robust debt advice industry out there with lots of different experts supplying independent help free of charge. I work for PayPlan. We've been in operation now for over 30 years, and we see about 3,500 customers each week. We're able to give either personal or business debt advice to help them through any difficulties that they're seeing. We're very, very aware of how important vulnerability is. In fact, as recently as last week, we were awarded the British Standard Institute for Inclusive Service in Financial Services in recognition of the work that we do on vulnerability. But I'm going to touch on vulnerability a little bit later. I want to start by talking about the cost of living crisis. And we're seeing record volumes of customers reaching out for help and guidance. And in fact, January's and February are often the busiest months of the year. We're about 20% up in terms of demand on what we saw last year, and last year itself was incredibly busy. So Chantal, I know, has got a poll that she's going to pose to you to kick us off, to get your thoughts and opinions on what might be driving that.
Thanks, Ed. So the poll should be on your screen now. So the question we have for you: according to a recent PayPlan survey, what factor did customers name as their biggest worry for them managing their finances? Apologies. So you've got choices from increased fuel costs, increased home energy prices, and increased food prices. Just leave that up there for a couple of seconds for you to cast your votes.
Thanks. And whilst you're considering the question that Chantal has posed to you, thanks for that, Chantal, I just want you to think through that what we've certainly witnessed over the last 6 to 9 months is we're starting to see a different demographic of customers reaching out for support, advice and guidance. Often it's customers that work full time, that have never experienced any difficulty in managing their finances previously, but because their expenditure has risen at an alarming and consistently high rate, it's really squeezed their disposable income and their ability to cover all of their commitments on a monthly basis, and they're reaching out for help, often in advance of things going wrong. And I'll come back and circle back on what I mean by that and how that links into consumer duty and prevention of harm, and the fact that if you can catch a customer who's beginning to struggle before things get out of control, it's a much better customer journey for them, and obviously preventing them from some of the wear and tear that we see from vulnerability that I will share with you a little bit later. How are we getting on with those results, Chantal?
Here we go.
Wow, I think that's a pretty resounding opinion from those of you on the poll, that the majority of our customers would be struggling with the home energy prices. And in fact, your answers pretty much exactly cover the poll that we conducted at the tail end of last year, where we saw that the highest response to that particular question from our customer was around increased home energy prices. About 60% of the uplift that we saw from the thousands of income and expenditure reviews that we complete on a monthly basis from last year when we collated them was that we saw on average about £140 to £150 per month increase in people's expenditure or outgoings, and about 60% of that was linked solely to increased home energy prices, people often paying double, sometimes triple what they paid the year before. Interestingly, linked to your poll result, the second highest response on that survey was increased food prices. For much of last year, actually, customers were changing their shopping habits. They were changing the supermarket that they were buying out, cutting out luxuries out of their shopping bill. But by the final quarter of last year and into this year, we were seeing a rapid increase in the price of food staples, bread, milk, butter, eggs, that were causing customers to not be able to reduce that cost anymore. And in fact, as recently as last week, when inflation was referenced at 10%, food inflation was actually nearly double that, at between 17 and 18%. And actually that really often bites the people that are on the lowest means. Fuel costs, of course, it feels like a distant memory now when people were paying over £2 for a price of a litre of fuel, but actually the prices haven't come down that much, and that's still causing some challenges for customers moving forward. Now, I mentioned a second ago that we're seeing a changing demographic of customers needing support and help due to the cost of living crisis. Consumer Duty echoes that, talking about prevention of harm, supporting consumer understanding and consumer support, getting to customers before things go wrong. And we are seeing more and more customers coming to us and recognising that they're looking for budgeting advice, income maximisation, support to manage the situation before they go into arrears or hit default. As well as that, we're seeing more and more vulnerable customers, as has already been referenced by both Gareth and by Robert. And in a second, I'll talk about what we've done to ensure that while we're supporting customers with their finances, with their debt problem, that when we recognise a vulnerability, we partner with specialists that are able to then pick up the baton and support customers with whatever vulnerability they have. And when needed, and not many customers need it, of course, but when needed, we're able to then provide appropriate, because of our FCA regulated advice, free debt solutions to address any challenge that they've got. I will be, after the session today, sending out a link to the survey that Gareth referenced, and I think it's very clear to us that those challenges are cutting deep. Some of the quotes that are within that survey are very, very powerful. We know that customers are using essential credit to cover their day-to-day living expenses. It's having an impact on their relationships. We know that 3/4 of customers have sleepless nights worrying about their money, and that we find that often facing up to a debt problem is really quite a hard thing to do. So the next poll question that Chantel's going to tee up for you is all about vulnerability. So Chantel, if you're able to share that with the audience.
Here we go. And the question we're asking this time is, according to a recent PayPlan survey, what percentage of customers said that being in debt had impacted their mental health? So I'll just give you a couple of seconds to vote on that one.
So while you're considering that result, and Chantel, I'm sure will bring those results back in a second, something I mentioned a second ago is that we recognise that vulnerability can be across lots of different footings, not necessarily mental health, although that's a very, very broad church that, of course, we've got numerous partnerships and we support customers through that. We're in a great position that 9 out of 10 customers that have a vulnerability will share that with us. And in fact, you can see the majority of you said 85%, and that is sadly the correct answer. Incredibly worrying that 85% of respondents told us that they'd sought guidance from a medical professional for either stress, anxiety, or depression as a result of being in debt. So it really does cut deep. But we support customers with addictions, whether that be drug, alcohol, or gambling addiction, people with serious ill health. It's impacted their ability to pay, and even circumstances. Different circumstances can pitch customers into a situation where moving forward is really difficult. The thing that I would stress is that facing up to a debt problem is really quite a hard thing to do. Often customers do delay because they're embarrassed or ashamed or are not sure where to turn. We know that 2/3 of customers wait more than a year for taking any action. And actually, the longer that customers defer doing that, the longer they're in that space of struggling with their debts, and the wear and tear that comes from that can be really, really bad. And therefore, the earlier that you can refer customers through for help, whether it's to us or to one of the other organisations that supports in that way, makes a huge difference. So just to close, before I hand over to back to Gareth and then on to Rick, is that from the survey that was referencing, we were told that 92% of the customers that we'd spoken to about their challenges felt calmer and more reassured following their interaction with us. And 9 out of 10 were much clearer about the way forward and about how things could move forward. And that's something that we're really proud of, and that we know that if we can help customers move forward, getting back in control of their finances, that we're doing our bit to help through the cost of living crisis.
Thanks, Ed. Thank you. I was making a few notes as you went through there. 30 years, did you say PayPlan's been up and running for now?
Yeah, just over 30 years.
Yeah, older than you, Ed. Terrible. Yeah.
I wish.
But look, some interesting stats from the survey, and I'm sure a lot of us will enjoy reading that. Well, take a lot of great useful information from it rather than enjoy it maybe when we come through. And we've clearly got some experts now, because it's great to see that people actually reflected and was aware and tuned into what's being felt by our customers. I think some of the other things that I sort of like took out of what you were saying there is experts in our field. You know, we came from the Rob's conversation as well, in terms of you give advice, you're regulated to give advice. You can tell a customer where many of us can't, because of the way that we're set up and the way that we operate. This is what's best for you. This is what will help. And these are the options that are actually open to you. And this is why I think it's best. And do you know what? That's such a great comfort to someone. I always try and put myself in the customer's shoes of, I know I need help. You're telling me I need help. I don't have the answers. Otherwise, I'd have done something about it already. I need someone to give me those answers with the confidence to say, this is what good looks like, and this is how you should do it. Are there any sort of times, I'll throw a curveball, are there any sort of times where maybe you don't see yourselves as the experts, or you're not able to help, or would you encourage that, look, as a starting point, we can get the conversation rolling and pass you to experts where we're not?
Yeah, absolutely. And we will support customers online and over the phone. Clearly, if a customer needs a face-to-face debt advice session, there are some amazing organisations, Citizens Advice and others, that can do a face-to-face appointment, which is something that we don't offer. But certainly online and over the phone, we're very happy to speak to any customer to help them, guide them forward and give them options on how to recover from the challenges that they're finding themselves in.
And online and going digital, that's the thing, is a phrase we hear in the industry an awful lot. Let's go digital. Always takes me back to when the TV channels changed. Go digital. I think it's something that we're seeing more and more, because more and more of our customers, like say it's a younger demographic, or maybe they're just more in tune to technology. Are you seeing a big uptake in the sort of digital propositions that you offer now?
Well, echoing something that Robert said, we also use WhatsApp, and WhatsApp, it proves to be incredibly popular with people. It gives them a full audit trail of everything that's been discussed back and front. It means that they can pick up and drop off and keep that conversation live. And when people decide that they want to access advice using that route, it does prove incredibly popular and does work with that younger demographic as referenced.
Yeah. It's great, isn't it, to give them the options? I think that's the sort of the key thing I'm taking away from that. We get advice, we get it in the right way, and we've got options in how we can get connected to that advice and that support. It's got to be a great comfort for us customers. Excellent. Excellent. Thank you for that. Really interesting stuff. And again, like I said, a lot of the details and the links and sound bites and some of the things we've been talking about today, they're going to be made available for you all at the end of the session as well. So don't think you have to quickly write down, right, what was the survey you mentioned, what was the stat? It'll all be made available, don't worry. Right, so we touched on a few different things there. One of the stats, I think, as well, leads us quite neatly to our next subject there, around people using essential credit for essential bills. One of them being rent, mortgage, etc., etc. You know, the roof over your head is not something that we should, you know, it is for a lot of people, it is the most important bill, right? It's not something that we should forget about when we think about the cost of living crisis. And certainly when we talk about the interest rate increases, a lot of people on those sort of variable rate mortgages, those tracker mortgages, are going to be sick of getting the letter or the email from their mortgage provider saying that it's, you know, the payments have gone up yet again. So, like I say, that leads us next to a question I'm going to throw over to yourself, Rick. We say more and more customers, aren't we, are finding it hard to meet everyday essentials such as rent. I'd imagine you'll see it at Shelter more too. So what can be done? What is it that we can do to help support these customers?
It's a very difficult situation, to be honest. I've worked for shelter since 2009, and we've never had the amount of kind of calls onto our website, onto our helpline, onto our web chat service, because people are just struggling across the board. 1 in 10 private renters are currently under the threat of eviction, so that's close to 1 million people. Equivalent of 2.8 million people are struggling to pay their rent, which is an increase on 24% based on last year. And more than 2/3 of people in private rented, which is 7.7 million people, say that they would struggle to find a suitable home if they were evicted. So it is an epidemic, and there isn't really an easy way out of it. I think what we found is people on benefits are always going to struggle to afford their kind of everything that they need to pay for. If you get universal credit as a single person aged under 25, you get £265 a month. So if you're thinking your average gas and electric bill is £165 a month, you have £100 for your food, for your travel, for your clothing, for your rent top up, because even if you get a housing cost element of universal credit, it won't pay the full rent. So you can't afford, it's just not enough money. So the government is doing kind of little bits and bobs with these one-off payments, but it's certainly not enough. I think what we're finding is it's the people on kind of what you'd class as like medium income, on what would have been 2 years ago a comfortable amount of money to live on. They're the ones that are really struggling. If their rent goes up by £200 or £300 a month, and their bills are going up by something similar, and the wages aren't increasing as a result, they are finding it very difficult. And if you're in private rented, and you're in 1 month of rent arrears, a landlord might decide to issue a Section 21 notice. It's a no-fault eviction notice. The client is then evicted, and then they're back to square one. So it's an incredibly difficult situation that a lot of people are in, and there isn't really an easy way of getting out of it. I think what we do, and I think what Ed touched on earlier, is kind of financial statements, making sure that people are budgeting correctly, prioritising their rent and their council tax and their gas and electric and so on. Also making sure that somebody's entitled to everything that they should be getting. Even if you're in work, you can be getting benefits that unless you knew about it, you wouldn't kind of think to apply for things. There's also quite obscure benefits out there, like war pensions and so on, that you wouldn't, again, think about. So making sure everyone's getting everything they should be getting, making sure that people are budgeting correctly as much as they can, and prioritising the rent and other priority expenses. But again, without being too negative about it, it does seem like it's going to get worse before it gets better. And I think a company like Shelter, it's really important to make sure that you know your legal rights. So the website is really good. There's a lot of information on there about where you would be in a certain process within like a repossession process, and it's just being there for people as and when they need it, really. Because again, without being too negative, I can't see that there's going to be an end to this for a good couple of years.
Yeah, there's certainly a need, isn't there? There's certainly a need for people to connect and as early as possible. Yeah, like you say, as early as possible, because if things are not going to get any better, let's tackle it head on. It's interesting that both you and Ed mentioned the sort of financial statement. It feels like, and I guess not all industries will be completing financial statements on a regular basis, but it feels like something that's a real useful tool. Do you think it's a useful tool for us as well as the customer in terms of helping them to realise maybe and face on, where Rob mentioned earlier in the call that people don't necessarily realise that they need help? Are we seeing this as a tool used more and more to help people sort of like bring the I guess the issue to life a little bit?
Yeah, I think again, from our point of view, it's the people who last year their expenditure would have been a certain figures, and then this year they might have to change it. They might have to cut back on certain things to make sure that they're playing the priority expenses, because home is at the heart of absolutely everything. If you lose your home, it takes away all your kind of security, basically. If you're out of work, we've got a couple of contracts on my team within Shelter. We've got a couple of like DWP contracts. If you're sofa surfing, that's not going to be a particularly good way of getting back into work. You're not going to have a good night's sleep to then go and do well at an interview, for example. So home is absolutely at the centre of everything. And financial statements, budgeting. What we also do is sometimes just suggest where somebody could make some cuts, or have you considered this? Have you thought about changing kind of the way that people are living, but how they use their expenditure?
Yeah, and sofa surfing is an interesting one. I think I've been in forums before where they've been sofa surfing. It just means, they're moving around from friend to friend. But it's important that you point out those other parts, isn't it? That actually that's probably not a great mental state of mind. It has other disadvantages to it. Yes, it probably is sort of slightly better than not having those friends and those support on. But the extra impacts it has on someone and the different disadvantages it can give, yeah, they can't be understated. Are we seeing more of that? Throw this over to sort of Ed and Rob. Are we seeing more and more of our customers that are in those situations, would you say, as things have worsened over the last year, shall we say?
Certainly with regard to housing issues, yeah, we're seeing more and more without any doubt whatsoever. So 22% of the customers we support ongoing on their road to becoming debt free have residential mortgages, so it's a big proportion. It's nearly 40%, it's actually 37%, but 22% of customers have housing arrears, so they're behind, whether that's to do with their rent or their mortgage. On the survey that I showed you a second ago, on the poll, you noticed that keeping a roof over my head wasn't on there. Pretty much in every single year that we've run that survey, and we do run it at the tail end of every year, it's always the top answer. This year it wasn't. It was knocked off, as you saw, by gas and electric, the cost of home energy. So particularly with the rising interest rates affecting mortgages, fixed rate mortgages maturing next year, I think 57% of all fixed rate mortgages are going to be coming up for renewal on residential within the next 18 months. In terms of buy-to-let mortgages, that percentage is even higher. So that will really affect the private rental market adversely, because rents will go up. And actually, and I'm sure Rick will know this much better than me, but actually the ability to get onto social housing is really, really limited now. It's very, very difficult to get onto a social housing register. So that means that a lot of people are trapped into private renting, and actually the costs are rising and their other costs are rising. So, I don't want to be a harbinger of doom or piggyback on some of the clear messages that Rick already gave, but we do have a real big problem with housing over the next 2 to 3 years, just based on economics, and that's a real worry.
And it's interesting that you mentioned there sort of housing, roof overhead used with the top, and that gas electric has sort of superseded it this time. Do you think, and I don't know, I'm just sort of thinking out loud now, do you think that we're maybe seeing not just the younger generation impacted here, who have the rent and the the mortgages, maybe the ones that maybe live unencumbered, but they're still seeing their bills squeezed so much? I know my parents said that what I pay for gas and electric is more than they used to pay for a mortgage when they had a mortgage. They're sort of like, the world has completely turned upside down for them when it comes to the bills that have the highest bills in the house now. So do you think we're maybe starting to see some more individuals in that older demographic that maybe are on a fixed income, say pensions, etc., really feeling the squeeze, as well as those who are impacted by rent?
I mean, I'm not an economist, and this will be careful to rate it in, so we probably get a bit carried away on this. But I think what we see is we do have a large proportion of customers that have mortgages, but they're smaller mortgages, and interest rates aren't actually as big an impact for them. What's really perverse and really weird is that the change in a mortgage interest rate in percentage terms tend to not get the same headlines, even though the customers become very aware of a couple of changes in the Bank of England base rate. What they kind of miss sometimes is the massive change that they see in their interest rate on their unsecured or revolving credit, but they don't notice that because they're only paying the minimum payment. And there's lots of things at force within different demographics. And actually, sometimes the housing issue we have is a longer burn, but there is also a particular squeeze that's going on right now where at the moment lenders are still lending. If we get to a point where credit lines are reduced or interest rates rocket on unsecured credit, then anybody that's trying to service that debt will run into a big hole really quickly. So there's lots of scary recipes that are all kind of bubbling up at the same time, really. Not to do down housing at all, because it's a really big problem, but actually there's some other forces sort of all coming in at the same time.
Gareth, could I just pitch in on that, because I think there's a really important bit here as well, that we operate within an industry where the reality is that a lot of the employees, the people we're employing on phones, etc., they're not necessarily on minimum wage anymore. There's been a change in the last year and people are on real living wage, but they're certainly not earning vast salaries. And I think one of the things we've picked up internally, and we talk about what's the impact of this, I think there's also an impact on the people who work for us, and we need to be aware that actually, we talk about surface-oafing and housing crisis, etc. I think again we've got a duty of care for our employees as well to some extent, and reach out to them when they're vulnerable. Yeah. I think that's really important, especially in an industry, as I say, such as ours, where we've got a lot of people in that sort of wage bracket where it is going to be tight when things change.
Yeah, no, second that all day, Rob. And I think, like I said, when we talk about empowering staff in order to do the right thing, we need to know that they're in a position themselves where they feel comfortable having these conversations. The weight and the toll it can have on yourself, and then having to talk about it maybe in your working life and not being able to escape it, that can have a big toll on staff. Let's be right. Is there any sort of like hints and tips you give, other than let's offer a 20% pay rise for everybody and a huge bonus at the end of the year?
I mean, some of the things that we've done is that, and interestingly, we've reached out and talked to various people. So we've done our own training for our own staff on sort of these areas as well to support them. I think we talked a bit earlier about the mental health bit. Certainly, we've built things into our systems now where we're making people sort of have breaks. So at least it tries to help on the mental health side of things as well. It almost forces them to take hydration breaks, stretching. We have. We've had online chair yoga sessions, online laughing sessions, all those kind of bits and pieces to try and help people with the mental side. But I think, in terms of the salary bit, I mean, look, I think the working from home model has probably helped people a little bit because it's less travel, less childcare, etc. There doesn't seem to be a mass move back towards offices yet, although I have to be honest, we are starting to speak to clients where they are now starting to talk about wanting people back in office as well. And I think the government are pushing some of that as well around, wanting to do that because actually it supports a lot of other small businesses and people who are also struggling. So there's sort of a bit of a roundhouse around that. But yeah, from our point of view, it's about listening, talking to them, coaching them, and realizing that they need to also be looked after. They can't help people if we're not looking after them.
Yeah, one of the things we've been advocate for a long time now here is the mental health first aid scheme. Having access to someone that you can go to and you can approach and you can do it the right way, is actually skilled enough to do something about it, makes a big difference. And the comfort that it can give to someone, knowing that they've got someone to talk to. Particularly, I think, like you say, Rob, there's advantages to the work from home and the work from office model. Be interesting how it plays out over the next few years, because I think that conversation is still going, as you say. Some are probably still wanting to move back to the whole office scheme, but the support, being there for someone, being there for our staff, does look different now. Now you've got the work from home model, and being able to support them the right way must look different in order for us to make sure they get the right support. Rick, I mean, for your guys at Shelter, I imagine there's some conversations that they have on the phone on the front line there that are really difficult, and some of them will ring true in their own lives and be quite triggering. Is there anything that you'd say that you guys do there to help and support the guys on the front line?
Yeah, well, we have a mental health first aid team, so we've got kind of advisors and team leaders who are kind of qualified in that. We especially during lockdown, I think, when all of our advisors were working from home for pretty much 2 years, that it had a big impact on quite a few staff on our team. So we kind of just roll with the punches. We put on different training for our staff as and when it is necessary, to kind of account for the different types of calls that were coming in, because there's more vulnerable people calling in because they're vulnerable due to the situation that they're in, but also we've had a big increase in people with mental health issues, and again, that might come from lockdown, that might come from the fact that they're at risk of homelessness more than they were 2 years ago. So yeah, it is one of those things that we've got a dedicated training team, learning and development team at Shelter, and they will put on training for the whole team or an individual team if it was deemed necessary.
If needed. Yeah, excellent. And I guess, Ed, being that you're working with creditors on a regular basis, I guess it's easier to connect through Teams, through like the channels that we've got today. It's easier to connect to staff when they're working from home and maybe reach a larger audience than it is to grab a load of people into the office. You do miss out on the treats that you tend to get with training. I have noticed that. You don't get the biscuits and the sweets and all that sort of stuff. But are you sort of seeing more demand in that sort of space from people reaching out to yourself saying, look, can you provide and share your wealth with our staff?
Yeah, absolutely. Over the last 2.5 years, the majority of the training that we've done, and we've trained thousands of people during that time, has been using Zoom or Teams. We are starting to do some face-to-face sessions again, but certainly the majority, I think, and Robert referenced this earlier, that there's almost a new normal, that where a lot of people are working from home, notwithstanding the challenges actually that puts on many individuals where their housing situation isn't ideal for home working. Without getting into too much about different abuse and difficult situations that people find themselves, it becomes very, very stressful where your home life and your work life suddenly collide, and that can be very, very isolating for some people. And I think we've all got a responsibility to support team members in those situations.
Too right. Here. I always say to our guys, we're as good, we're as strong, we're as protected, we're as supportive as they are to the customers. They are the biggest asset. I don't think anybody will ever disagree with that. They are the biggest asset. Training them, empowering them, able to know which experts are available and help, and actually have that realization that we're not always the experts, and so we do need to pass on to the people who know, and be able to give the comfort to the customers is a huge thing. And these are all things that, I said time and time before, are not just done once a year. There's no such thing as an annual refresher and then, right, my job's done, everything's in a great place, right? It's an ongoing conversation, as it needs to be with guys, as the industry, as the environment, as the economy changes. Keeping the guys up to date and up to speed and empowered seems to be a real message coming through today. But help is available. We've got some worrying stats, haven't we? Help is available. There's people out there are experts, and there's the right way of doing it. Let's not get that message lost, eh? Excellent. Right, guys. I think Chantel, I was going to, while we've got sort of 6 minutes or so left, pass over to yourself and see if there was any questions raised by anyone during the session that we could maybe pass over.
Absolutely. A couple of questions here. Just got a comment, first of all, from Kat. So Kat has said that Robert made a really good point about everybody's employees also been impacted themselves, and the business is very mindful of that. So, highlighted with mental health teams and everything, I suppose, is as equally as important as supporting your customers.
Too right. We're as strong as they are, right?
Absolutely. A question that we got early on from Chris. Chris has asked, is there a need to invest more time or money in cultural and language skills?
Interesting question. Rob, I was going to pass to yourself for that if you wanted to weigh in.
Sorry, can you repeat that again? You cracked up slightly on the...
Absolutely. Is there a need to invest more time or money into cultural and language skills?
I think there is. I mean, look, we there are. It's interesting. The Ukraine war obviously has brought a whole new load of people over into the country, and I think there is a need to make sure that we understand that there are people in the UK who need additional support in additional ways, and I think again. It's interesting on those kind of things. Again, as an outsourcer, we sometimes recruit people to deliver languages directly, or we use those services that are out there to support people. But certainly, I think supporting somebody with a subject such as this, where we're talking about people, and the fact that they are vulnerable. If we can support them in their own language, then absolutely, I think that is a better customer journey for them, and they will get more out of it, and they'll get the right information first time. So, yeah, I absolutely agree. I think there is a need to invest a little bit around that where it's appropriate.
Yeah, definitely. I think I'd just add to that by saying that I feel like I can't go a single call without mentioning consumer duty. It's just the world that I'm living in right now, but a lot of work's been going on here about making sure that that tone of voice, that message, it's timely, it's clear, it's transparent. The key parts of the information that we need to get across to a customer are done so in the right way. When we talk about vulnerability, the key thing for me is knowing your audience, knowing what vulnerabilities will exist in that target market for the communication that you're sending out. Is it being sent clearly enough? Do we need extra layers of clarity adding around it? In the world that we live in financial services, we do use jargon, and a lot of the time we have a real regulatory compliant need to have to use that jargon. But what can we do to make that clearer? What can we do to put it in the words of someone that's going to understand it? And I keep going back to that point, our target market, our target customer, the person that's there to receive it, understanding what makes up, what the key characteristics of vulnerability within that target market is really important, so that you can write and test your communications to them. And that was the last piece I think I'd make that we're working on really hard, is that making sure that we do have that inclusive design to communication. We include customers in the experience. They are our best pole, our best barometer to tell us whether or not we're doing it right. Include them in that testing process is something that I think is really becoming powerful, rather than, I think, as some people have done before, your quick easy win is like a readability test. There's more that can be done. Is the message getting across to the customers really key?
To build on that, Gareth, we recognise within the target market that we're supporting in terms of customers in a level of financial difficulty or vulnerability, numeracy levels and literacy levels are lower. And because of that, we've worked with people like Plain Numbers, Amplify Global, Sign Video, lots of different ways to improve accessibility to the kind of support and advice we can give, regardless of language. Actually, it's about making sure that it's just accessible across the board, whatever language people want to help. Access to help.
Gone are the days where accessibility was braille and large print. There's a whole host of different requirements out there.
Yeah.
Amazing, thank you. Our next question comes from Amanda, and it's around social housing. So it built up a couple of questions. So is there an earning threshold for move onto private rent, so from social housing to private rents? We're seeing some social tenants with good incomes coming in, but choosing to stay in social housing to reap the benefits of low rent. Rick, I guess that's one for you to take.
Yeah, there isn't ultimately. So if you have a council house, it's always been the case that is your council house for the rest of your life, for however long you want to keep it, unless you're evicted or you move on. I think last year there was actually a reduction in social housing. I think they built something like 20,000, but with the ones that were sold off and the ones that were kind of condemned, there was actually a reduction. So getting social housing is incredibly difficult. We've had a client before, and they were in temporary accommodation in London for over 20 years. So they were accepted as homeless, and they've been waiting for a council house for 20 years. So they've been moved from accommodation to accommodation. And again, there is no way out of that. There's a lot of things that Shelter are doing at the moment to try to force the government into building more social housing, but with everything that's going on, I can't see that there's going to be a sea change where they're suddenly building thousands of council properties. It's just not going to happen. So when we get clients through and they want a council house, the majority of the time we're saying we don't think this is going to be an option that you should be going down, because it's giving them false hope. If you're a single person with no health issues in certain parts of the country, you'll just never get a council house. You'd be accepted on the housing register, but you'd be in about band D or band E, something like that. So you would, it's yeah, again, I feel like everything I'm saying is really negative, but the housing kind of at the moment is just, it's very, very, very difficult.
The reality of the landscape, I feel.
That's great. Thanks, Rick. I will just squeeze one more question in. I'm very conscious of the time. I know we're overrunning slightly, but this one's quite, I feel, important. Anna has asked, or she said it was mentioned earlier about the perception of vulnerability and the changing demographic of those that need support. Do you think it's time to change the terminology around vulnerability as an industry term? I thought that was a really good question.
I think it is a really, really good question. Yeah, I think
it's an interesting one.
You know, vulnerability now is incredibly broad. I think the FCA have made steps to ensure that anybody that's at likelihood of harm could be termed as potentially vulnerable, and that broadens things out. But actually, more and more customers are finding themselves in a situation that becomes very difficult, very distressing for them. And as I think it was Robert mentioned earlier, sometimes customers become vulnerable without really recognizing that they are vulnerable. And therefore it puts much more of an onus on firms and partners and people that are supporting customers to go out of their way to support people and provide pathways to help where relevant. And you're quite right, it's a growing subject.
I know that first thing I would say is that I don't think we all address customers as a vulnerable customer to them. I don't think that's the language that is promoted by any way, shape or means. I'm sure that's not what happens. And this is why I think we tend to see an awful lot of our vulnerability specialist teams have different names, adopt different titles, extra support, customer care. These are sort of like common things I say. But I do think we need a common language in the industry. We all need to know that what we're talking about and what we're referencing is a vulnerable customer. And that's not me saying that it has to be vulnerable customers, but that common language is really important. The definition that we work to, as Ed alluded to from the FCA, you know, someone that is especially susceptible to harm. Yeah, we need a terminology so that we can have these conversations and pull together. Should it be vulnerable? I don't know. I guess it's a debate that could roll on for quite a while, but I'd be interested to know from the people on the call or the people listening, maybe some suggestions about what else we could be using. It's certainly ingrained at this point, is what I would say. You know, I look at what we're attending today. You know, it's certainly ingrained, and people do certainly use it as a term often, just not maybe directly with customers, just across ourselves in the industry.
Great, thank you. We do have a couple more questions, but again, we are overrunning. So the people that have posed questions, we will get back to you. I'll get some answers from our panel and get them sent over. Just to quickly say, we are going to continue the conversation on a private LinkedIn group around customer vulnerabilities. If you'd like to be invited to this group, just pop yes or LinkedIn yes in the chat, and I will make sure you get that invite. But over to you, Gareth, for your closing remarks.
Yeah, excellent. First of all, thank you, Ed. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Rob. Really great insight. The best part of these sessions are be able to get the opinions from the experts in their fields, and I think we've managed to touch on some real subjects today. I think we've brought to life a little bit, hopefully, that, you know, the landscape in the UK right now for our customers isn't the best it's looked in a long time. You know, there's work and there's opportunity there for us all to do, but there is support available, and there is definitely a way of being able to provide that support. So thank you, guys. I think it's been fantastic to sort of listen and get things from your view. And then just thank you for everybody for listening, whether it be live now or whether you're listening on a recording. Thank you, and thank you for the questions posed. Like I said at the beginning of the call, really, it's a conversation, it's a collaboration. We want to use this to keep the conversation going so it doesn't end when this call finishes. On that note, we will be doing these on a 2-monthly basis. So in 2 months' time, dates to be confirmed, we will have have another session where we'll get some experts together again and have a good conversation about vulnerability in all its different guises. So what I would say is, if you've got a particular topic out there that you're struggling with, a particular category or characteristic, whatever it might be, something that you're having real issues with, put it forward, and we'll aim to sort of like cater to the audience in terms of what it is that we discuss on these forums. But last of all, thank you. It's been a really useful session, hopefully, and certainly one that's been very thought-provoking for myself. So thank you all for listening, and thank you for the guys for your valuable insight.
Amazing, thanks Gareth. I just want to echo that. A very special thank you to Gareth for chairing. Thank you to Ed, Rick and Rob for taking the time to join us today. Any links referred to throughout the session will be included in your follow-up emails that will be coming out, which will include the recording. I've got the link for the PayPlan survey. I've got some links from Rick from Shelter, and also some links from Rob, which I'll share with you, which you'll find useful. For further information on UKCCF, all our events or membership, you can visit our website www.uk-ccf.co.uk. This webinar will also be featured under the webinar library section on that website. Don't forget, you can keep up to date with all of our industry's recent news, blogs, white papers and resources by visiting Contact Centre Monthly. It's www.contactcentermonthly.co.uk, and you can also subscribe to our newsletter. I look forward to welcoming you all again. Thank you very much, and goodbye. Have a lovely afternoon. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chantal.
Thanks.